If you're ready to uncover the secrets history tried to bury, subscribe now, because every week we reveal the dark truths the world isn't ready for. In the dark heart of the Middle Ages, a shadow crept silently through Europe, invisible, merciless, and unstoppable. Entire cities fell silent, streets emptied overnight, and church bells rang endlessly as bodies piled higher than the walls of cathedrals. This was the Black Plague, the deadliest pandemic in human history. But what if the story we've been told for centuries is only half the truth? We've heard it was spread by rats, by fleas, by filthy streets. Yet buried deep in the chronicles of time are whispers of something far more mysterious: strange lights in the sky before outbreaks, entire villages where people vanished without explanation, and forbidden writings that speak of experiments and curses long erased from the records. For centuries, kings and priests worked to bury these secrets, locking them away in hidden vaults, fearful of what the truth might reveal. But today, those secrets are rising from the shadows. Stay with me, because what we are about to uncover is more than a plague, it is a warning that echoes across time. And if you believe history is finished, think again, because the Black Death may still have something left to tell us. The year was 1347, and Europe stood on the edge of disaster without even knowing it. From the bustling ports of the Mediterranean came merchant ships, their sails torn by stormy seas, their cargo heavy with silks, spices, and death. When the ships docked, the townsfolk rushed to unload the treasures. But what they found instead were sailors already dead, their bodies twisted with black boils, their skin marked with dark patches as if burned by fire from within. Those who were still alive begged for mercy, and within hours, the sickness spread like wildfire. No one could explain it. Doctors bled patients until they grew weaker, priests prayed until their voices broke, and families locked themselves indoors only to vanish together in silence. The plague moved with terrifying speed, sweeping from one village to the next, carried not just by fleas or rats, but by something far greater, fear itself. Rumors spread as fast as the disease. Some said it was a punishment from God, others whispered that foreign merchants had poisoned the wells, and some even believed it was sorcery. But whatever the truth, Europe had entered an age of death unlike anything it had ever seen before, and yet, historians now ask an unsettling question: was the Black Plague merely a natural disaster, or was there something darker carried on those cursed ships, hidden in their shadows? The Black Death did not remain in one place. From the harbors of Italy, it moved swiftly along trade routes, carried by ships, caravans, and frightened travelers fleeing from city to city. But with every attempt to escape, the plague only spread further. Venice, Florence, and Genoa, once centers of wealth and power, became silent graveyards. Streets once filled with merchants and music now echoed with the cries of the dying. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned, their doors marked with crude symbols warning others to stay away. In France, Paris saw its population cut nearly in half. In England, London turned into a city of death. Coffins were in such short supply that bodies were thrown into mass graves, one atop another, as bells tolled endlessly in mourning. But perhaps the most haunting sight was the road itself, endless processions of carts loaded with corpses, creaking through villages, the stench of decay poisoning the air. Survivors dared not look upon the carts, for they believed even gazing at the dead could bring the sickness. Europe was no longer the land of kings and knights, of scholars and cathedrals. It had become a continent of fear, where no place was safe, and no one could explain why death followed so relentlessly in the plague's shadow. As the plague devoured Europe, a strange and terrifying figure began to appear in the streets: the plague doctor, clad in long black robes, leather gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat. Their most chilling feature was the beaked mask, resembling a monstrous bird. The beak was stuffed with herbs, spices, and dried flowers, believed to protect them from the deadly miasma, or poisoned air, thought to carry the sickness. To the frightened townsfolk, the sight of a plague doctor brought no comfort. Instead, it was a symbol that death was near. Wherever these masked figures walked, houses were marked for quarantine, families torn apart, and the dead carried away, armed with a wooden cane. Plague doctors prodded patients from a distance, unable to touch them directly. They carried crude tools for bloodletting and strange potions, though none of their treatments worked. Their presence was more ritual than remedy, a last, desperate attempt to fight an invisible enemy no one understood. Some whispered that the plague doctors were not healers at all, but messengers of death, their bird-like masks resembling omens from hell itself. To this day, the haunting image of the plague doctor lingers as one of the darkest symbols of human history's greatest nightmare. When death struck every street and no cure seemed to work, desperation gave birth to strange and terrifying superstitions. In towns across Europe, people believed the plague was a punishment from God, and so, they turned to rituals of pain and sacrifice. Flagellants marched barefoot from village to village, whipping themselves with iron chains, their backs bleeding, hoping that suffering would cleanse humanity's sins. Crowds gathered to watch, believing salvation might come through blood. Others sought protection in charms and talismans. Amulets carved with crosses, dried toads, or strange runes were worn close to the skin. Some burned incense day and night, filling the air with thick smoke to chase away the evil air. In some regions, desperate families even buried live animals beneath their homes as a sacrifice, praying the plague would pass them by. Alchemists and so-called healers mixed potions of crushed emeralds, powdered pearls, or even mercury, promising cures that only poisoned the sick further. The line between faith and madness blurred, as entire communities tried anything, to survive the invisible terror that claimed their loved ones. These superstitions did not stop the plague, but they revealed the fear that gripped an entire world, a fear so deep it drove people to darkness in search of hope. As the Black Plague tightened its grip, entire kingdoms began to fall apart. Cities once bustling with trade and laughter became silent, their streets filled only with the sound of church bells tolling for the dead. Law and order crumbled, and the fabric of society itself unraveled. With so many dead, farms were abandoned, crops rotted in the fields, and famine followed close behind. Trade routes collapsed as merchants refused to travel for fear of infection. Gold and silver lost value, because survival was worth more than wealth. Families abandoned each other, too terrified to risk infection from their own blood. Mothers left children, husbands left wives, and in some places, neighbors nailed doors shut, trapping the sick inside their homes to die alone. The plague had turned trust into fear, love into betrayal. Even the authority of the church, once the unshakable pillar of medieval life, began to crack. Priests died in the same numbers as their flocks, and prayers offered no protection. People asked bitter questions. If God was merciful, why did he send such horror? Whispers of doubt spread, planting seeds that would one day transform Europe forever. The Black Plague was not only a disease of the body, it was a disease of society, breaking bonds of family, faith, and community until nothing was left but fear and survival. When fear rules, reason disappears, and during the Black Plague, fear turned neighbor against neighbor. With no true cure, people searched desperately for someone to blame. Rumors spread like wildfire. Many believed the plague was not natural at all, but the work of enemies, witches, or the cursed. In towns across Europe, whispers accused Jewish communities of poisoning wells. These lies sparked violent pogroms, where innocent men, women, and children were slaughtered or burned alive. Others accused so-called witches, claiming they conjured the plague through dark magic. Trials and executions surged as terrified villagers looked for someone, anyone, to carry their pain. Even strangers, foreigners, and beggars were attacked, simply because they were different. The plague did not discriminate, but humanity did. The real disease was not only in the body, but in the mind, the poison of fear and hatred. Thousands who might have lived were murdered, not by the plague, but by their own neighbors. The Black Death became more than a sickness, it became a mirror, reflecting humanity's darkest instincts when faced with the unknown. When the Black Plague finally loosened its grip, Europe was forever changed. Out of the ashes of despair rose a new world, one forged by survival, fear, and transformation. The massive loss of life left kingdoms shattered, but it also shifted power. With so many dead, survivors found new opportunities. Serfs demanded higher wages, peasants claimed abandoned lands, and the rigid structures of medieval society began to crumble. The plague had broken the chains of feudalism, laying the foundation for a new age. Religion, too, was never the same. The Church's inability to stop the plague planted seeds of doubt, weakening its once absolute authority. People began to question old beliefs and seek answers in science, philosophy, and exploration. In time, these questions would spark revolutions of thought, leading toward the Renaissance. The legacy of the Black Death was not only devastation, it was transformation. It taught humanity both its fragility and its resilience. From the darkest tragedy came progress, and from unimaginable suffering came a world forever altered. The secrets of the Black Plague remind us that history's darkest moments are never just stories of death, they are also stories of rebirth.